Hey there, guys! Welcome to the Robidoux Row live stream here today on the 10th of December. Today we're going to do part two of what we started last week with the textiles and clothing industry. Today we're actually going to talk about a few people here in St. Joe, some businesses, but we're going to start off with giving you guys kind of a history look at textiles and clothing industry as a whole. First and foremost, of course, we do want to remind you that we do have our membership plans going on right now. We definitely would love you guys to join up with us here. We're looking into ways you guys can even join on the website or here on Facebook. But for right now, just give us a call. We have some great benefits. Obviously, we've harped on our NAR memberships here, but they really are a great benefit. You get to go to a number of amazing museums around the country absolutely for free.
Yeah.
It's just such a great benefit to you. I mean, and along with that, though, you also get our events that we have. And we do have an events calendar coming out for 2020. We have a lot of really interesting new events that you may not have done before. You also get our newsletter, which has fascinating articles that are written by Brooke and myself and the presidents of our board and some other members of our board about the history of the area we live in. And just fascinating stories of what happened in the area, who were the people that founded this area. So definitely think about it. Our memberships are really not terribly expensive, so you get some really great benefits, and you support a great mission like us here at the Historical Society, where you're supporting our mission of preserving St. Joseph history. So as we said, we're going to be talking a little bit more today about the textile industry. And Brooke wanted to start off today kind of giving you guys an overview of what the textile industry was. Where did it come from? When did obviously we've seen clothes going all the way back to ancient times, but when did it start becoming a thing where you could buy a hat or you could go buy a large t-shirt?
Yeah.
That's what we're kind of talking about today. And then we're going to get into the really nitty gritty of some of the cooler stores that were here in town and some of the evidence like we talked about last week with hemp about how that was such an important business. So Brooke, go ahead and take over.
So as we all know, for most of human history, clothing was mostly handmade, and up until very recently, it was something of a production that was manufactured. We've talked about textiles in our last video. Raw materials such as wool, flax, and cotton were three big things, and those had to actually be spun by hand into yarn to thread to make clothes. Weavers created fabrics in their own home or in small workshops on looms. Before ready-to-wear clothes, as we call it today, go in, pick it up off the rack, standardized clothing sizes, it was actually handmade. Garments were handmade individually. There were cottage industries of this. People would do it in their own homes, and we'll get into a little bit of that later. But people for the lower classes, servants and the like, a lot of situations they would get clothes that would be hand-me-downs. So that's just, we'll talk about a little bit of the separation of the classes too. So just to give a small overview, ancient Babylonian times, as early as the 1400s, there were ready-to-wear garments for a lot of their military individuals. So we do see some of that. Workshops were being created to outfit the military, and that actually reoccurs in our history in America in the early 1800s with ready-to-wear men's military uniforms. And in the 1800s, when that happened, it was a universal size that was tried out for women also, and entirely failed because women's sizes are not men's sizes. So having ready-to-wear clothes actually started with military uniforms. Isn't that fascinating?
That is. So yeah. It sounds like it was kind of a necessity thing. Like, obviously, military, you don't want to have to take all your military guys to the tailor to get they're going out in the mud. They're going out into war. So it sounds like you're talking like early ready-to-wear was more of necessity-based. Like, oh, these people who are all going to go to the same place need to look the same.
Oh, yeah.
And so we're just going to mass produce and basically say, hey, you're a big guy. You get the big size, you're a little guy, you get the little size.
Right. And it wasn't until the 16th century that we start coming across things that were more ready to wear, such as gloves, stockings, collars, hats, and we'll see that in St. Joseph quite a bit. Obviously, we have a big fur trading industry. Yeah. Hats were a really big thing here, which we'll get into. But I just wanted to name drop a few of the inventions that really helped propel the textile industry into more of a mass production mindset. I know that in 1738, Lewis Paul and John Wyatt, England, invented the roller spinner machine, which spun cotton into thread. It drastically changed how fast you could actually spin thread. By 1764, multi-spinning spools were invented, and they were able to spin thread more quickly than ever before. And then Richard Alkaright in 1770 produced stronger threads and was actually powered by water. So now we're actually getting into steam powered production phases of textiles. And this is still, we haven't even gotten into the 1800s yet. The power loom was patented in 1784 by Cartwright, which was able to weave threads into cloth on a machine. So now we're getting into machines. And later movements increased the speed and efficiency. So women started being able to replace men who were the former weavers of these machines. So women are starting to enter the workforce. In some of these older directories, we actually, despite, a male-dominated patriarchal business environment, we actually have evidence of very early entrepreneurs, dressmakers that were women in this field that were very prominent in the 1860s and 1880s that we're talking about today.
Definitely.
As it related to the Midwest, our direct timeline, women were, for the most part, you could get, again, you could get the hat. You could get the shoes that were pre-made in sizes. You could get the gloves. You could get the cloak. But the women's dresses were not easily standardized. And were very difficult to standardize just because of, hourglass, apple shape, which wasn't even terms until the 1930s when there was an actual study on women's clothing. It wasn't until the 1930s that there was an actual study done. It was all white women to see, okay, how do we actually standardize women's clothing for mass production? There was mass production that took place. A lot of this had to do with ill working conditions in factories. There was a lot that was made. And so we might get into a segment about working rights conditions and things like that. We'll get into that later. But you wanted to mention Frederick Worth.
Yeah, Frederick Worth was kind of that turning point. Mm-hmm. So in 1858, he opened a store in Paris that became known as was the first haute couture store. Mm-hmm. And that really was that turning point of industry.
Yeah.
About 10 years earlier was the first time you ever saw a department store that sold clothing. So you're kind of seeing this new transition. So let me bring up a couple pictures here of what we have here in St. Joe. And so you can see here you have hat manufacturers, you have dressmakers. The specified businesses were easier to do. Like you were talking about having hats and caps and gloves and stuff. Generally speaking, a human hand, there's only certain sizes. You may have smaller and bigger hands, but if you have a big hand, it's going to fit in a big glove. A small hand, even today, we have small, medium, large, extra large. Same with hats. You had that ability to kind of make sure everyone was doing it because you could just say, hey, you have a big head, you get a big hat.
Yeah.
All across the board. And the dressmakers are the same way. They were very specified. And as you guys can see here, all of the dressmakers in St. Joe in 1860, which is when these images are from, were women dressmakers. There were no male dressmakers in the area. And so that was more of that specified items.
Right. And then you were talking about Frederick Worth.
Mm-hmm.
And I know the 1858, we're going back to the department store creation. He also created the model. He created the mannequin. So if you went into a store during the 1880s and you saw a mannequin, you could thank him for that. Women could go in and say, okay, I want this dress. They would take the dress down, alter it to that women's dimensions, and then there you go.
Exactly. And that also is what led to the clothing store. These two
Mm-hmm.
images here really partnered with each other. You had your clothing stores now. Someone who really, what we found is in that early 1850s era, everyone that sold stuff was general goods stores. You went to a general goods store. Even one of our favorite people who we'll link down to her actual story, but Rachel Fleming,
Yeah.
her original store was called the Fleming General Goods Store. There wasn't a aspect of her being a milliner, which is a hat maker,
Yeah.
or a dressmaker. She was legitimately just a general store. In fact, we have a book that's from 1868 where she is specifically listed as a general store, and then later in the 1880 edition, she's listed as a milliner.
Yeah.
And so these clothing stores that you're seeing here, and this advertisement we're about to bring up, which is for the Jackson and Co., really, as you can see here, they talk about they have men's clothing, but also all the other stuff men wanted.
Mm-hmm.
Bags and outfit stuff and toiletry goods and trunks for travel.
Underwear.
They really viewed it as the way of their clothing was everything man.
Yeah.
Or everything woman.
And I just wanted to point out, in these directories, you have very niche, very specific people that you go to for very specific things. Like this 1868 one, hoop skirt and corset manufacturer. You went to them for your hoop skirt and corset. Another one, you went to a hat, cape, and fur for your hat and your cape. Another one, you went to get a bonnet. So everything was very separate. So the whole point about this is the introduction to the catch-all store, the department store, the goods store, where you have a plethora of many goods and services that you can provide under one roof. That's what we're talking about.
Exactly. And that's really where you saw, like you see here next to the tailors. Part of the reason I put these next to each other is about half of them transfer from one list to the other.
Yeah.
So you would go into this men's clothing store, which that was basically what it was. You can even see at the top, see gents furnishing goods. And you would get your shirt. It would get tailored for you right there on the spot. Whereas women's goods, it was very much more of a, you have to go to a tent or dressmaker, or the dressmaker comes to you.
Yeah.
And like we talked with Miss Rachel Fleming, again, we'll share this whole story of her at the bottom. But her story is that she was a general goods store owner who made dresses and then realized I should just make dresses. And that was kind of her story. And so a lot of these businesses that grew up here in the area really grew out of that movement to the department store era, where there was kind of this growth of now you can buy clothes that aren't just homemade. But at the same time, people still didn't make them homemade. A lot of people would go to these high-end haute couture, which of course means high-end clothing stores, and just copy the seams. Like they would just look at the dress and then make it at home. They didn't want to go to the store and buy it because they didn't have the money to buy the expensive dress.
Mm-hmm.
They would go and say, hey, let me see the seams, copy the seams, and then go make it at home.
Yeah, and just to point out how big this industry became by 1835, in New York, a company advertised for employment for 800 tailors and 1,200 plain sewers. So this was a huge enterprise. And that's even with a lot of hand sewing at home.
Yeah.
The people were still hand sewing. And so this was just showing the sheer amount of production that had to go into this. Yeah.
Exactly. And so like we showed you there with some of the local ones, it was really a huge business. Like when we look through these store guides throughout the town and all the different businesses here, this is probably the second biggest list of things that were made here in town. We see a lot of grocery stores because, I mean, people need food, and groceries at that time were dry goods stores. So you're talking completely general goods. You're talking You could buy your nails all the way to your food to your clothing at these places. But the next biggest one has been clothing stores, pretty much across the board.
Yeah.
There's a lot of wagon makers, a lot of those ones, but really we've seen, I mean, we've flapped these back up. Just dressmakers, there were 10 in 1860. For hat makers, we're looking at another 5. When you're looking at the clothing stores, you're looking at another 10 of those. Tailors, another 10 of those.
Yeah, like these wholesale retail clothing tailors. Let's say that you're a person, you go in, you try on one of these dresses, these high-end fashions, and you said, okay, this is too expensive. So what they would do is they'd try it on, and while they were trying it on, the lady would turn it inside out to look at the seams and the pattern very carefully, and then literally copied it at home.
Exactly.
Just going back to what Daniel was saying.
Yeah. So obviously this was a very important bit. I mean, people have always needed clothing, and that was kind of the era St. Joe grew up. Really was an era where you saw a change in the clothing industry.
Yeah. Large mills popped up.
Exactly.
Factories produced the fabric and garments that would be included. Overcoats, petticoats, shirts were a really big thing. That was easy. Trousers for men, gloves, hats, and footwear was the big to-do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So this was just a little taste for you guys about the clothing. We actually have a really interesting exhibit here at the Row that talks about this same industry. So we'd love for you guys to come down and see some of those images that we have here and some of the stories of some of the stuff. Like Liz Fleming's story is a fascinating story. Definitely check out the Facebook Live video we have down in the comment section here, but also come in and see the whole story of her. We have her image. We have a picture of her storefront and an actual ad that she had of her traveling to Maysville to a hotel there and telling them, I'm coming to town. Be ready for me with your ideas that you want for your dress. I will have those ready for you to be able to make. And important, supposedly she could make a dress in one day.
Wow.
So definitely check out the video about her. She's a fascinating character. Come check out her information. And we just want to thank you guys for joining us today. We'll be another one next week. And then Christmas time, the schedule's going to be a little funny. We'll have a few, but they're going to be harder. They may be Thursday. They might be Friday. Just keep an eye. We'll let you know next week the exact schedule because obviously with the holidays coming, I'm not coming in on Christmas to play you guys a video, to make a video for you guys. But we may be able to get one ready for you guys before Christmas. So thanks so much for joining us here today. Hope you guys enjoyed this. If you guys have any more questions about any of this kind of textile stuff, let us know down in the comments. And next week we're going to move on to another interesting subject. Thanks, you guys. Bye.